Do you know that feeling of being surrounded by lies and still not being able to stop searching for the truth? Hwang Jun-ho is the kind of man who dove far too deep into that abyss, and the price he paid was his own soul. He did not enter Squid Game for greed or survival. He entered for love, for a bond of blood, for a brother who was lost and who, ironically, became the very monster he was trying to defeat. But what happens when the search for justice turns into an obsession? When the line between right and wrong begins to blur, and the truth you've searched for reveals itself to be harsher than the lie? Jun-ho's story is about this, about carrying an impossible mission on his back and realizing, too late, that maybe the enemy was never on the other side of the gun. And that is where the most painful and most human part comes in, because deep down, we have all been someone's We have all chased a truth that destroyed us, or tried to save someone who did not want to be saved. And maybe that is exactly why the journey of this lonely officer hits us so hard, because it speaks, without filters, about courage and the price of feeling too much. If you are a fan of cinema, psychology, and want to understand the mind behind your favorite character, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss any video. But first, comment below which character you want me to analyze here on the channel. Now, let's go to the video. Hwang Jun-ho is that kind of character who arrives quietly, but with a look that already says everything. He is not there to play. A determined officer, ethical to the core, but with a restlessness that goes beyond the badge. When he infiltrates Squid Game in disguise, the audience understands that behind that cold posture, there is an anxious brother, driven by a doubt that does not let him sleep. What happened to his missing brother? It is curious, right? Sometimes what drives us is not courage, it is despair disguised as a mission. Jun-ho represents that friend who never knows when to stop. You know when someone gets it in their head that they need to discover the truth, even if the price is their own sanity? That is him. He does not accept absence, silence, the phrase, move on. And deep down, anyone who has lost someone knows how treacherous that kind of pain is. It does not scream, it whispers. It convinces you that it will only go away when you find answers. But what if the answers are worse than the mystery? He is an exemplary officer, but we notice that the badge, for him, is almost an emotional armor. It is the way he found to keep control in a world that keeps running from the truth. Jun-ho believes that justice is a form of love, and maybe that is why he dove so deep into the games. He does not just want to solve a case. He wants to save what is left of his bond with his brother. And without realizing it, he ends up entering an even crueler game, the psychological one. What is most interesting about Jun-ho is that he represents the kind of person who believes they can control everything, their own fear, the environment, even the enemy. He watches, analyzes, infiltrates, and for a while seems to be one step ahead. But that need for control is what traps him. He believes that being rational protects him from pain, when in fact it is what prevents him from facing it head-on. It is the classic paradox of the more I try to protect myself, the more I destroy myself. Remember that feeling of entering a place and sensing that something is deeply wrong, but you stay anyway. That is what Jun-ho experiences all the time behind the scenes of the game. He blends in among the masked guards, but the real mask is his, a cold expression trying to hide the fear of finding his brother dead, or worse, his brother guilty. That is when the viewer begins to realize that his journey is more emotional than investigative. The camera follows him silently through the dark corridors, and with each step we feel he is closer to something he will not be able to handle. It is like watching someone dig their own abyss, believing they will find light at the bottom. And that is deeply human, who has not gone after a truth believing it would bring peace, only to discover it brought more questions. What makes Jun-ho so fascinating is the contrast. He is methodical, calm, strategic, yet inside he carries a silent rage, a fear of failing, an almost childlike desire to prove he can still fix the past. He is that son trying to restore what was lost, even if it means losing himself along the way. It is this contradiction that makes him real, vulnerable, and at the same time, dangerous. And the most curious part is that, without realizing it, Jun-ho is not only investigating Squid Game, he is investigating himself. Every corridor he crosses is a metaphor for his own mind, dark, labyrinthian, full of secrets and traps. and what he will find in there may be more devastating than any clue. But to understand that, we need to dive into the conflicts that shaped him. The relationship with his brother, the frontman, that kind of love that comes with a weight? Jun-ho's love for his brother is exactly like that. Beautiful, but painful. He admires him, searches for him, and at the same time blames him. The disappearance of his brother became an open wound he tries to stitch with justice. But what he really seeks is not a culprit, it is forgiveness itself, because deep down, he feels he failed the person he loved most. And that erodes slowly. It is curious how sibling love can be a mix of admiration and rivalry. Jun-ho grew up looking at his brother as a model, but time, distance, and silence turned that admiration into something bitter. He does not understand how someone he respected so much could vanish without a trace. It is as if his brother had broken an invisible promise, the promise to never abandon him, and that kind of abandonment does not fade, it shapes. When Jun-ho discovers that his brother is the frontman, the ground disappears. It is not just the revelation of a secret, it is the destruction of a belief. Imagine spending years idealizing someone only to discover that they became the villain of your own story. It is like finding an old photograph and realizing the smile in it was already a lie. That rupture is the moment when Jun-ho stops being an officer and becomes just a man trying to understand where everything went wrong. The scene between the two is almost silently intense. There are no screams, only the weight of what lies between the lines. The frontman's gaze is cold, almost empty, while Jun-ho overflows with anger and disbelief. It is the perfect contrast between someone who repressed everything and someone who feels too much. And maybe that is why their tragedy is so striking. It is the clash between two extremes, absolute control and uncontrolled pain. Psychologically, what we see is a duel of identities. The brother who should have been a reference became the symbol of everything Jun-ho fights against. It is as if he looked at the frontman and saw a reflection of what he could have become had he chosen cynicism over morality. And that hurts more than any bullet, because when the mirror shows what we fear most, the instinct is not to face it, it is to break it. But the great irony is that, deep down, they are more alike than they would ever admit. Both live obsessed with control, hide emotions, and sacrifice everything in the name of a mission. What changes is the purpose. While the frontman surrendered to the system, Jun-ho still tries to fight it. It is almost poetic. One represents surrender, the other resistance. Two sides of the same wound. This relationship explains much of how Jun-ho behaves. He does not trust easily, does not open up, and carries a contained anger that only grows with time. He is the kind of man who smiles, little because he learned that vulnerability is weakness. But deep down, he is driven by a genuine desire for reconnection. He just no longer knows the way. And that makes him repeat the same mistake as his brother, hiding feelings behind a mask, even without realizing it. And what is most tragic in all of this is that Jun-ho enters the game to save his brother, and ends up realizing he may need to save himself from him. This shift in perception is the beginning of his emotional collapse, and the starting point for the next traumas that define him. Because when the pain comes from family, it does not heal easily, it turns into fuel. The trauma of loss and abandonment for Jun-ho, loss is not just a memory, it is a constant echo. It is a kind of pain that does not go away, it only changes shape. Since the disappearance of his brother, he carries a void that he tries to fill with work, with control, with endless investigations. And the most curious part is that this is common in many people. Sometimes we do not notice it, but we work too much, we stay too busy. Precisely so we do not have to face what we feel. It is the classic, if I do not stop, I do not think. This trauma makes Jun-ho who he is, methodical, focused, almost paranoid. He lives as if the world is about to collapse, and in a way, for him, it already has. He is the type of person who never fully trusts again because he learned that even those we love can disappear without explanation. And this is one of the hardest pains to heal, the pain of an absence that has no closure, because when there is no goodbye, the brain keeps looking for answers even when the heart is already tired. Jun-ho tries to convince himself that he is on a mission of justice, but what he is really looking for is relief. He believes that finding his brother will bring meaning back to his own life. It is as if he is telling himself, if I understand what happened, maybe I will breathe properly again. This kind of illusion is dangerous because it turns pain into purpose and purpose into prison. He stops living for what is real and starts living for what is missing. In psychological terms, the abandonment of a close figure, like a brother, creates an attachment wound. The person begins to fear trusting, fear losing, fear opening up. Jun-ho is the portrait of this. He approaches others cautiously, observing, testing, evaluating, and when something threatens his sense of certainty, he withdraws. It is as if the brain says, if I do not get attached, I do not suffer. But deep down, what he is doing is stepping away from healing. Have you ever noticed how some people turn pain into competence? They become excellent at what they do, almost perfectionists, because they cannot bear the feeling of failing again. That is how Jun-ho is. He channels trauma to maintain control. But control, in this case, is an illusion of safety. On the outside, he seems firm. On the inside, he is always on the edge of collapse. He is like a building that looks beautiful on the outside, but has deep cracks in its foundation. And this fear of abandonment shapes the way he deals with danger. When he infiltrates the Squid Game, he does not hesitate. Because for someone who has already lost what mattered most, the fear of death loses strength. He acts as if life is just a tool, something he can risk in the name of truth. It is almost as if he is saying, if I die trying, at least I do not die for nothing. And this kind of thinking is more common than it seems, especially in those who have lived through traumatic loss. Abandonment also generates something called emotional hypervigilance. Jun-ho is always alert, always expecting the next blow. That is why he sees details others do not, why he notices patterns and acts ahead of time. But ironically, this ability is the child of fear. He became excellent at detecting danger because danger never left his mind. It is the brain trying to compensate for a trauma that was never healed. And in the end, Jun-ho's greatest fear is not losing his brother, it is losing meaning. Because everything he does, every step, every disguise, every risk, revolves around that search. And when the search becomes the center of life, absence becomes fuel. But how long can that burn? Maybe that is the question, forming inside him, the one leading straight to the next trauma, the weight of guilt. The trauma of guilt for Jun-ho, guilt is like a shadow that has followed him since his brother disappeared. Even without having done anything wrong, he carries the feeling that he failed. It is as if he lost control of his own story and now lives trying to write the right ending. This happens to many people. When life takes someone from us, the brain starts looking for explanations, and when it does not find them, it invents them. If I had done something different, if I had noticed earlier, and like that, the what-if becomes a prison. Jun-ho has that typical look of someone who feels the weight of the world on his shoulders. He is the kind of person who cannot bear the idea of having left someone behind. So when his brother disappears, he does not think my brother chose this path. He thinks I should have stopped him. It is guilt disguised as responsibility, a mental trap that turns love into obligation. And that feeling drains energy because it makes you fight the past, an enemy that never gets tired. Guilt also explains his perfectionism. Everything about Jun-ho is controlled, meticulous, timed. He needs to do everything right because making a mistake reopens the wound of loss. Do you know that sensation that one slip could ruin everything? He lives like that. And the curious thing is that many people relate to this. That inner pressure that does not come from others, but from oneself. It is the I have to handle it as a way to try to earn peace. In psychology, guilt is an emotion that can become fuel or poison. In Jun-ho's case, it became both. It pushes him to act, to seek justice, to go beyond fear. But it also destroys him inside. He believes he will only redeem himself when he finds his brother. But what he does not realize is that guilt does not go away with answers. It only changes shape. And that is something we learn in the most painful way when we finally get there and nothing changes. It is interesting how his guilt mixes with an almost heroic sense of duty. He acts as if he were chosen to fix the world, even if it costs him his life. He is the kind of person who saves everyone except himself. And this is dangerous because it turns altruism into escape. He does not allow himself to stop, to rest, to feel. Because deep down he believes that suffering is the price of redemption, and here comes the self-judgment. Jun-ho does not forgive others easily, but forgiving himself is almost impossible. Every mistake becomes a sentence, every failure a scar. He lives, trying to fix the past through actions in the present. It is like someone trying to extinguish a fire with gasoline. The more he acts without forgiving himself, the more he burns. And the worst part is that he acts like this believing he is in control. Deep down, Jun-ho's guilt is also a form of attachment, because as long as he feels guilty, his brother is still present. Pain becomes a bridge between the two, an invisible bond that keeps him connected to someone who is gone. And in a way, that is why he cannot let the guilt go, because letting go would mean accepting the loss. And who wants to accept the end of something they still love? This is the silent tragedy of the character. He tries to save his brother to forgive himself, but the only possible salvation would be looking at himself. And since he cannot, he keeps sinking into the mission, without realizing that the more he tries to fix the past, the more he repeats the same patterns. And this spiral of guilt and repair will lead him to the next breaking point, the conflict between duty and morality. The conflict between duty and morality. There comes a point when Jun-ho is no longer a police officer. He is a man at war with himself. The difference is that the battle is not against criminals, it is against his own conscience. He believes he is doing what is right, but each decision pushes him a little closer to the edge of the abyss. It is that classic dilemma. How far would you go to defend your values? Because sometimes, to fight evil, you end up becoming a version of it. Inside the Squid Game, Jun-ho's sense of justice begins to crack. He witnesses atrocities, sees innocent people massacred, and feels the weight of not being able to intervene. His morality screams, "This is wrong," but duty whispers, "Stay quiet or everything ends." And this is one of the worst human tortures, having to watch injustice without being able to act. It is like being trapped in an invisible cage made of ethical choices. Little by little, he begins to cross lines he swore he would never cross. He spies, lies, deceives, infiltrates, and justifies everything in the name of the greater good. But what happens when the greater good becomes an excuse to break your own limits? This is the point where duty stops being a virtue and becomes obsession. It is the kind of thing many people live through without noticing, when purpose becomes prison. Jun-ho begins operating like a ghost. He observes, investigates, but no longer has the same clarity about why he is doing it. The focus on solving the case starts consuming the man behind the badge. And the most ironic part is that he becomes similar to the creators of the game themselves. Men who also began believing they were bringing justice to a corrupt world. In the end, it is always a thin line between justice and moral vanity. Psychologically, what we see here is a phenomenon called cognitive dissonance. His brain tries to reconcile two truths that cannot coexist. I am just and I am lying, betraying and killing to prove it. And when these ideas collide, he feels anguish but masks it with rationality. It is as if he is telling himself, I am not the villain, I am only doing what must be done. But that sentence, repeated enough times, can turn anyone into a villain. The most human thing about Jun-ho is that he truly believes he can fix the system. He wants to prove that integrity still exists even in chaos. But the Squid Game is a cruel mirror, showing that sometimes the purity of an ideal does not survive the filth of the real world. And this clash between ideal and reality is what destroys him. It is the same kind of exhaustion we feel when we try to change everything alone without realizing that we also need to change inside. The tension grows because the audience understands what he does not. He has already lost balance. Every step inside that maze distances him from his own humanity. His gaze hardens, his body moves automatically, and his empathy begins dissolving in the middle of anger and frustration. It is that moment when duty is no longer noble, it is necessity. He needs to finish what he started, even if it costs him his sense of right and wrong. And it is precisely when this moral line fades that his tragedy becomes inevitable. Because in the end, Jun-ho is not fighting only the system, he is fighting what he is becoming inside. And this internal battle will intensify even more when another element enters the scene: isolation. The solitude that inevitably follows those who carry the weight of being the only one who is right. The trauma of isolation. Jun-ho always seemed comfortable with solitude. But the truth is, he did not choose to be alone. He was pushed into it. Work, obsession, guilt, everything contributed to building a wall between him and the rest of the world. And the curious part is that this isolation is extremely common in real life. Sometimes we think we are protecting ourselves, but in practice, we are disconnecting. It is the kind of armor that protects from attack, but also blocks the embrace. During his infiltration in the Squid Game, his isolation becomes almost physical. No one knows who he is, no one calls him by his name, and everything he does is in silence. It is as if he is slowly disappearing, becoming a shadow inside a world already made of masks. And this is deeply symbolic because the closer he gets to the truth, the farther he gets from his own humanity. Isolation also has a psychological function. It numbs. For Jun-ho, being alone is the only way to avoid dealing with the pain of others, the memory of his brother, the fear of attaching and losing again. He believes that keeping people away is the same as being strong, but in reality, it is just another form of escape, and it is impressive how the brain is good at disguising escape as focus. How many times have you said, "I need to be alone," to think when in truth you just did not want to feel? The curious part is that isolation for Jun-ho is not just a symptom, it is an identity. He defines himself by the distance, by the function, by the mission. He is the typical case of someone who confuses purpose with existence. If he is not saving, solving, or investigating something, he does not know who he is. And this is more common than it seems. Some people get so lost in the role they play that they forget the name of the person behind the uniform. This solitude also shapes the way he sees the world. Everyone becomes a potential enemy, and trust becomes almost a security flaw. No one enters, no one leaves. It is an emotional isolation so deep that even empathy becomes scarce. And the problem with that is that when you shield yourself too much, you end up trapped inside your own fortress. And the echo of your own mind is the most dangerous sound of all. There is a symbolic scene that sums this up well. Jun-ho hiding in one of the secret rooms, silent, surrounded by secrets and corpses. His expression is not fear, it is emptiness. It is the look of someone who is there but is not, as if his body were still fighting but his soul had already given up long ago. And that kind of emptiness does not explode, it corrodes, slowly, without warning. Jun-ho's isolation is also a form of penance. He punishes himself by being alone. He believes he does not deserve company or rest or comfort, because deep down, he feels he failed too much to be loved. And that is the most tragic part. He wants justice for the world but does not believe he deserves justice for himself. It is the kind of solitude that does not come from the absence of people but from the absence of forgiveness. And inside this silence, the character begins to fall apart. Every hallway he walks through, every held breath, is a reminder of how high the price of his search has become. But isolation still has more to reveal, because from it another emotion is born: fear. Not the fear of death, but the fear of having no one left when everything is over. And that fear pushes him toward the next abyss, the loss of himself. The fear of losing himself, Jun-ho begins to realize that he no longer knows who he is. The badge, the mission, the disguise, everything blends together until it becomes one single thing. Is he the police officer, the abandoned brother, the avenger, or just someone trying to survive in a game that devours identities? It is as if every mask he wears steals a piece of his soul, and the most frightening part is noticing that the more he tries to save someone, the farther he gets from himself. This kind of psychological collapse is common in people who live for a purpose greater than themselves. They give so much to the cause that they forget the self. It is the classic, "Who am I without this?" Jun-ho cannot see himself outside the search. The mission became the mirror where he tries to recognize himself, but the reflection is already cracked, and when the mirror cracks, there is no way to see your own face without getting cut. It is interesting how the fear of losing oneself does not arrive suddenly. It comes in fragments. First comes forgetting, an empty stare, a long pause, a "why am I doing this again?" Then comes dissociation. He acts on autopilot, without emotion, as if his body works on its own. And finally comes the emptiness, that inner hole where no victory feels meaningful. It is the point where purpose no longer fills, it only weighs. For Jun-ho, identity was always tied to control. He believed that if he could keep everything under control, he would remain whole. But the Squid Game is the opposite of that, an environment where control is illusion, and that destroys him. Every time the plan fails, every time the truth slips away, every time his brother confronts him, he feels a part of himself break. It is like trying to hold water in your hands. The more strength he uses, the faster everything escapes. This fear of self-loss is also a reflection of living for someone else. The missing brother became the axis of his identity, and when he finds him again and realizes he is no longer the same, Jun-ho collapses. It is like having spent years preparing to embrace someone who no longer exists. This is one of the cruelest pains in life, realizing that the who I am was tied to the who he was. His collapse does not happen explosively, it is silent. Tired eyes, mechanical gestures, lack of reaction. He keeps moving but no longer knows where he is going, and this is a powerful metaphor for many people. How many times do we keep doing tasks, goals, obligations, even when meaning has already disappeared along the way? It is the body in motion with the soul on autopilot. Psychologically, what Jun-ho experiences is an identity collapse. He loses the reference of himself and the brain begins reacting with disorientation and fear. The threat is no longer the enemy outside, it is the emptiness inside. It is a kind of terror that has no face and no sound but consumes everything. And that is what drives him to impulsive, desperate, almost suicidal decisions. Because when the mind no longer knows who it is, any end feels like a beginning. And it is precisely at this point of total loss that he faces the inevitable, the final confrontation with his brother. But now, it is not just a fight of blood, it is a symbolic fight. The encounter between what he was and what he could have become, and what happens there on that cliff, is more than a tragedy, it is the culmination of all his fears. And what did you think of the mind of Hwang Jun-ho? Do you think he survived, or that fall was the definitive end of his search for justice? More than that, have you ever felt like him, fighting for something that cost you more than you imagined? Tell me in the comments. I really want to know which part of Jun-ho's journey affected you the most. And take the chance to tell me which character you want me to analyze in the next video. It can be another from Squid Game or from any series or film that left you with that existential question echoing in your head. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell, and stay here with me. Because there are still many complex minds for us to dive into together and maybe understand a little more of our own as well.